Hi, welcome to valuationpodcast.com, a podcast and video series about all things related to business and valuation. My name is Melissa Gragg, and I provide online valuation services for mediation and litigation based in St. Louis, Missouri. Today, we will discuss Donald Trump's tax return, and it's really a case study for divorce attorneys and what to look at in a personal tax return with Jason Soman. He's a valuation expert in Boca Raton, Florida. He owns his own firm, Accounting and Valuation LLC, and he's specializing in business valuation and forensic accounting in the context of divorce. Welcome, Jason. How are
Thank you,
you?
Melissa, for having me. It's a pleasure to be back on.
Now we also have ordinary dividends, which what I'm seeing in some of these is it's talking about Donald Trump Elizabeth Trust, Donald Trump Fred Trust, Elizabeth Trump grandchildren, which I would assume is also a trust. So like what is all of this telling us is happening from a divorce perspective, if we would see this?
Yes, so the trusts are going to come into play, especially when you're dealing with the super wealthy, and trusts come into play a lot of times because when you give something to an irrevocable trust, it's not yours anymore. You may be paying taxes, it may be showing up on your tax return, but you don't really have control of those assets in a lot of instances. And I'm by no means a trust and estate attorney, and I'm not giving any legal advice. But I've seen it before where sometimes people will, they'll, instead of giving it to their spouse, they'd rather set up a trust for their kids. Something that I would try to understand, if we're dealing with the situation, there's a lot of trust involved, and there's maybe a dispute as to, what's going on there. I may want to look at, are they really operating this as a trust, or is the trust kind of a front? Meaning like, this entity could be in a trust, but really the owner just keeps running it like a family business, spends money on perks, does whatever they want because, a trust, there's a certain concept, having a special duty, a fiduciary duty. You see lawsuits all the time, people breaching trust. So the trusts are important. Probably getting into all those details there, I'm not the right guy to do that, but I think it's important in any divorce to identify what are the assets, what do all these assets own, what do the trusts own, what do they control. Maybe the trust controls some of these companies that the Trumps report on their tax returns, so that could be extremely relevant. If someone has a trust, maybe that impacts their need for alimony, right, or their need for child support or something along those lines. So I think it's important to know about the trust, figure out what they own. I also think it's interesting because, for people are always talking about whether he got he had any help from his family or anything like that. And I mean, I see trust here. Whether he benefited in his career from that, I don't know. But I think it's interesting to see trusts reported, and he's receiving dividends from those trusts.
Well, and trust to me in a divorce proceeding mean a lot of different things. One is you have very, very advanced estate planning for high net worth, wealthy families, especially generational wealth that protects those monies from transferring through the family and protects them from divorce in some capacity. So it is, like in some of the cases that we've dealt with, we've brought in trust attorneys. You can't make the assumption that just because you do family law that you understand the nuances of a complicated trust. The other is what assets does it own, but how much control does any of the people in the marriage have? Because in some trusts, yes, you may be receiving something, right? But how much control or ownership, and just because you're being taxed on it doesn't necessarily imply control or power or the capability of splitting the asset in a divorce. Like those two things can be very different. And then the trust could protect itself a little bit from you even getting to the documents. If one of the parties is not an owner of the trust, but is paying taxes on the trust, like could that happen? Potentially.
Absolutely. And,
Yes.
I think it's also important from a discovery perspective, right? And I think you mentioned it before. where there's trust tax returns, there's trust agreements, there's appraisals, so there's a lot of stuff that comes along with the trust. Like, let's say I'm looking at this now, I may want trust tax returns for these trusts. I may want all the trust documents. These may be a little older. It looks like it's from his parents, so we may not have appraisals. But I think when I see the terms trust, my ears perk up because I start thinking, well, what documents do I need to get to really understand what's held by the trust, who
Well,
controls it?
and people don't understand that, yes, we're in there for a divorce, but what valuators do, like the base, the where you cut your teeth on getting valuation experience, is for doing gift and estate returns that involve a valuation. And so what I think people need to understand is, typically when you're putting assets in a trust in any capacity, you're probably going to have to value it to place it into that entity. And so that's what we're talking about, that there could be an appraisal or a business valuation, is because it literally could have had one whenever it was placed in. And then you're following, was it really a gift? So gifts, inheritance, and such, the income flows and follows different in the divorce than they do in other situations. So you're kind of mixing all of these issues in one situation, but you have to be mindful. There could be valuations. There could be a specific reason why that trust does not want you into its books. I've had full companies protected from divorce by being in trusts that were very adequately protected. So you can't make an assumption that you're just going to break the trust or break all of these documents. It's all accessible in a divorce. Some of this is done really well. Getting a trust attorney or somebody that understands it, the valuator, those should understand it, right? Like the valuation person
Absolutely.
should understand it for sure.
Absolutely.